On the day of my mother's funeral, my own father took me behind the chapel and said, "Now you're going to take her place. Turn around." That's when I discovered he wasn't a widower. He was a murderer. Hi, my dear ones, my sweethearts. How are you all doing? I'm Grandma Sandra. I'm 78 years old, and I live here in the Eastwood neighborhood, right here in Birmingham, Alabama. I was born in a small town called Clarksville, a little place in the countryside that you might know, but nowadays it's here in the city where I make my life. You know, this morning I was here in my kitchen doing my favorite pastime, preparing fresh biscuits to sell at the little park in the neighborhood. See, my children, after I retired, I discovered I had a real talent for making biscuits. I started this almost by accident, you know? I had some neighbors who always asked me to make them when they came to visit, and then a neighbor, Mrs. Ruth, who lives on the corner, said, "Sandra, why don't you start selling these biscuits? They're the best I've ever tasted in my life." And that's how it started. Today I wake up early, around 5 in the morning, sift the flour I buy at Joe's Market, season them with that sharp cheddar cheese, and make about 20-30 biscuits a day. I sell them right there in the park, under the shade of an oak tree. People already know me. They know that every morning Grandma Sandra is there with her warm little biscuits. My home is quite simple, you know? It's a small house, but tidy. I have my potted plants on the porch, some ferns that I love to water in the evening, some petunias that look spectacular when they're in bloom. My grandson, Junior, my youngest daughter's son, comes here often after school to do his homework with me. He's 12 years old and smart as a whip. He always asks me about the old stories, wants to know what life was like in my time. And speaking of that, my dear ones, before you click that red like button and subscribe here to the channel, which makes me very happy when you do that, you know, I wanted to make a special request. Tell me here in the comments, from which corner of the United States are you watching me? And what time is it where you are? Are you watching this, Grandma, in the morning with your coffee, after lunch resting, or in the evening before bed? I always read all the comments and get emotional knowing that there are people from all over listening to this old lady here. Tell me, I want to know where all this love comes from. Let's make a chain of love throughout the entire country. You know, my children, today I wanted to tell you a story that I've carried in my chest for many, many years. It's a heavy story, one that touches the heart, but it's important to tell. It's about something that happened to me when I was very young, back in Clarksville, in rural Alabama. A story about family, about secrets that we sometimes keep, and about how sometimes the people who should protect us are precisely the ones who hurt us the most. It's one of those stories that takes courage to tell, you know? But I think this way. If my story can help one person who's going through something similar, if it can open someone's eyes or give strength to those who need it, then it's worth sharing with you. So grab your coffee, settle into your chair, and come with me on this journey. I'm going to take you back to Clarksville in the 1960s, when I was a girl who thought she knew her father, who thought she knew her family. But life, my dear ones, sometimes teaches us very painful truths about the people we love most. Oh, my dear ones, when I close my eyes and think about my childhood in Clarksville, it seems like it was yesterday, and at the same time, it seems like it was a lifetime ago. I was born in 1946, in a very simple wooden house, on a dirt road near the Baptist church, there in the center of town. In those days, Clarksville was very small, everyone knew each other, and families were large, very different from today. My father's name was Robert, but everyone in town called him Bob. He was a tall, strong man, tanned from the sun, always very serious. He worked as a ranch hand on a large farm a few miles outside of town. He left home before sunrise, riding his chestnut horse, and only came back when it was getting dark. When he came home, he always came tired, with those clothes smelling of leather and sweat, his boots dusty from the road. My mother, poor thing, was named Elizabeth. She was a small woman, very petite, with green eyes that sparkled when she smiled. She took care of the house and us, the children. There were 4 of us, me, who was the oldest, then came my brother William, who was 2 years younger than me, Frances, whom we called Franny, and the baby Thomas, who was almost 10 years younger than me. Our house was small, but my mother made it seem cozy. It only had 3 rooms, the living room in the front, which was where the wooden table we ate at was, my parents' bedroom, and another small room where I slept with Franny in one bed, and the boys slept in bunk beds against the wall. The kitchen was outside, under a tin roof, with a wood stove that my mother lit every day early to make coffee. I remember waking up to the smell of coffee mixed with burning wood and the sound of my mother's pans preparing breakfast. It was always the same thing: strong black coffee, biscuits, or grits with fresh milk that the neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, brought us every morning. My father ate quickly, always in silence, grabbed his leather hat, and left for work. In those days in Clarksville, children played in the street. My siblings and I, along with the neighborhood kids, spent all day out there. We played tag, hide and seek, hopscotch that we drew on the ground with pieces of chalk. The boys flew kites made of colored tissue paper that our mothers saved from birthday parties. I loved playing house with Franny, making pretend meals with leaves and pebbles. When it rained, and boy, in Alabama the rain was a party because it could go months without a drop falling, we'd run into the street to take a rain shower. My mother would yell from the door, "Sandra, bring that girl inside before she catches a cold." But she herself liked to see us happy, you know. Sometimes she'd even smile seeing our joy. My mother was very affectionate, always had a caress, a little kiss, a pat on our heads. She knew how to make some papaya candies that were delicious, and whenever she had money saved up, she'd buy us some colored sugar lollipops at Mr. Charlie's store. It was our greatest joy. But with my father, oh, how things were different. He was very quiet, very somber. When he came home from work, the whole house fell silent. We couldn't make noise, couldn't run through the house. He'd sit in the wooden chair in the living room and stay there quiet, just staring at the wall. My mother served his dinner in silence too, always very careful not to make noise with the plates. I remember we were afraid of him, you know. It wasn't a fear of getting beaten, because back then, he didn't hit us, no. But it was a fear of him getting angry, of him yelling. Because when he yelled, oh, the whole house trembled. His voice was strong, thick, and when he was irritated, everyone stayed as quiet as a mouse. My mother always told us, "You obey your father, you hear? Don't make him nervous because he works so hard to support you." And we really obeyed. When he arrived, we'd run inside the house and stay quiet until bedtime. But there was something I noticed and didn't quite understand back then. Sometimes, when my father came home, my mother had bruises on her arm or a purple mark on her face that she said she got from falling or hitting the door. She always had an explanation, you know. "Oh, Sandra, your mother is clumsy. I tripped on a rock in the yard." Or, "I hit my arm on the corner of the table by accident." I was a child and believed it, right? I thought my mother was really kind of accident-prone. But there was something in the way she spoke, a sadness in her eyes, that I couldn't understand. She'd be quieter on those days, wouldn't hum while doing housework like she used to. And my father, on those days, was even more frowning than normal. Sometimes I'd see him looking at my mother in a strange way, as if he was angry at her for something she had done. But I didn't know what. That's how I grew up in Clarksville, between playing on the dusty street, my mother's affection, and the respectful fear of my father. It was a simple life, a rural family life, where men commanded and women obeyed, where children didn't question adults, and where some secrets were kept behind closed doors. I had no idea that those small signs, those purple marks, that sadness in my mother's eyes, were just the beginning of a much darker truth that I would only discover years later, when it was no longer time to save her. My dear ones, it was when I turned 15 in 1961 that things in our house began to change in a way that shook everything I knew about my family. Until then, I lived in that little child's world, playing in the street, helping my mother with household chores, without really understanding what happened behind closed doors when we weren't watching. I remember as if it were today, the day of my 15th birthday. My mother had made a cornbread cake, my favorite, and had invited some neighbors to celebrate with me. It was a Saturday. My father hadn't gone to work because the boss had given the ranch hands the day off. I was so happy, you know? 15 was an important age for us back then. It meant I was already becoming a young lady. The neighbors brought some simple gifts: a wooden comb, a piece of scented soap, some colored hair ribbons. Mrs. Wilson brought a glass of fresh milk from her cow to go with the cake. Everything was so cheerful, with the women talking in our small living room, laughing at the stories they told each other. That's when my father appeared at the door. He had gone to Mr. Charlie's store to buy some cigarettes, but when he came back and saw all that commotion in the house, his face completely changed. He got frowning, with that dismissive face I already knew well. "What's all this racket in here?" he asked with his thick voice, standing at the living room door. "Sounds like a rich folks' party, so much noise." My mother quickly got up from the chair where she was sitting and went to him, kind of nervous. "It's Sandra's birthday, Bob, 15 years old. I just called the neighbors over for some coffee and a piece of cake." I saw him look at her in a way I had never seen before. It was a hard, cold look, as if she had done something very wrong. The neighbors all went quiet at once, feeling the heavy atmosphere that descended on the room. "Party for what?" he said, taking his hat off his head and throwing it on the table, right in the middle of the little plates with cake. 15 isn't the age for parties, it's the age to work, and you there wasting the household money on foolishness. Mrs. Wilson, who was a brave lady, tried to smooth things over. "Oh, Bob, it's just a simple little cake." Elizabeth made it with the cornmeal left over from last week. But he cut her off mid-sentence. "Mrs. Wilson, you take care of your house and I'll take care of mine." His voice came out so thick, so threatening, that the poor woman shrank in her chair. That's when something happened that marked me for life. My mother, trying to defend her friends and smooth over the situation, spoke softly. "Bob, the neighbors just came to keep me company. It doesn't cost anything to have a little joy in the house." That was it. It was like she had lit a powder keg. My father turned to her slowly, very slowly, and I saw something in his eyes that gave me a chill. It was anger, but it wasn't just anger. It was something darker, more dangerous. "Are you contradicting me, Elizabeth?" he asked, taking a step toward her. "In front of everyone, you're disrespecting me?" My mother went white as paper. Her little hands started to tremble, and she shook her head no. "No, Bob, I'm not. I just meant—" But he didn't let her finish. He raised his right hand, very slowly, like someone about to slap, and my mother curled up, closed her eyes waiting for the blow. The neighbors were paralyzed, not knowing what to do. For a moment that seemed like an eternity. He stood there with his hand in the air. Then he looked around and saw that everyone was watching. He lowered his hand, but got very close to my mother and spoke softly, but in a tone that everyone heard. "Later we'll talk about respect. Alone." The neighbors quickly got up and started saying goodbye, making up excuses, that they had to go make lunch, that they had forgotten a pot on the stove. In 2 minutes, our house was empty, just with the family. The cornbread cake was there on the table, cut in half, and that heavy atmosphere filled the whole house. My father grabbed his hat and left without saying anything else. I heard the sound of his horse's hooves moving away. My mother stood in the middle of the room, looking at the cake crumbs scattered on the floor. Her little hands were still trembling. That's when she bent down to start cleaning up the mess, and I saw something that broke my heart. She was crying, but trying to hide it. Thick tears ran down her face, dripping on the floor along with the cake crumbs. "Mom." I started to speak, but she gestured for me to be quiet. "Go play with your siblings, Sandra, and don't make noise." Her voice came out all shaky. That night, when my father came back home, I pretended I was sleeping, but kept my ear open. I heard them talking in the bedroom, but couldn't understand the words. I just knew his voice was low but hard, and that she only answered yes or okay to everything he said. The next day, Sunday, my mother appeared with a purple mark on her forehead. When I asked what had happened, she said she had hit the corner of the bedroom door during the night when she went to get water for him. But I was 15 years old. I wasn't a little child anymore who believed any story. And for the first time in my life, I began to suspect that those purple marks my mother always had, those bruises she explained as falls and stumbles, maybe weren't accidents at all. It was that Sunday that I also noticed that my mother started walking differently around the house. Quieter, more cautious, as if she was always paying attention to where my father was and how he was feeling. When he came home from work, she'd stop whatever she was doing and go meet him at the door, asking if he wanted coffee, if he was hungry, if he needed anything. And he started talking to me differently too. He was no longer that distant but respectful father from before. Now he looked at me with eyes that made me uncomfortable, especially when I was helping my mother in the kitchen and he'd stand at the door, just watching. One day, about 2 weeks after my birthday, he came home from the ranch earlier than usual and found my mother and me washing clothes in the yard. We were talking softly about women's things and laughing from time to time. When she saw him standing there watching us, my mother tensed up immediately. "Too much work to be laughing like that," he said. "Sandra, come here." I approached him, somewhat apprehensive. He put his heavy hand on my shoulder and squeezed hard. "You're growing up, girl. You're becoming a young lady. But don't go thinking that because of that you can be partying and disrespecting the rules of this house. You understand?" "I understand, Dad," I replied, feeling his fingers dig into my shoulder. "Good, because in this house I'm the one who commands. And what I command, everyone obeys. Your mother knows that very well, don't you, Elizabeth?" My mother stopped scrubbing the clothes and looked at him. "Yes, Bob, everyone knows." But when her eyes met mine, I saw there a cry for help that still hurts my chest today. It was as if she was trying to warn me of something, prepare me for something, but couldn't speak openly. That night, lying in my bed, I began to understand that my happy childhood in Clarksville was coming to an end. Something very bad was approaching our house, and I felt deep in my heart that my mother knew exactly what it was. Oh, my dear ones, the months that followed after my 15th birthday were the darkest of my life. What had started as threats and hard looks turned into something much worse, into violence that still hurts me to remember. My father started coming home earlier and earlier from the ranch, always with some excuse, that the work was lighter, that the boss had dismissed the ranch hands earlier, that he needed to resolve some things at home. But the truth was that he wanted to keep an eye on my mother, controlling every movement she made. The first time I witnessed him really beating her was on an October afternoon when the heat was scorching in Alabama. I had gone to get water from the well in the backyard when I heard a strange noise coming from the kitchen. It was like the sound of something hitting wood, followed by a muffled groan. I slowly approached the kitchen door and saw a scene that froze my blood. My father had my mother cornered against the wall, holding her by the neck with one hand and with the other hitting her in the face. It wasn't a slap. No, my children. It was a real punch, heavy, that made her head swing from side to side. "I told you not to leave the house without telling me," he yelled quietly, trying not to draw the neighbors' attention. "I told you that you couldn't go to Mrs. Wilson's house without my permission." My mother tried to explain, but could barely speak because he was squeezing her neck. "Bob, I just went to return the dish towel she lent." "Liar!" He gave another punch, this time in her stomach, and my mother doubled over, trying to catch her breath. "You went there to gossip about me, that's it. You went to tell others that I beat you." I stood there, paralyzed, not knowing whether to run to help her or go call someone. But before I could move, my father saw me standing at the door. For a second, our eyes met. I saw something there that I'll never forget. There was no shame at all on his face. There was no regret. There was only anger at being discovered. "Sandra," he said, letting go of my mother, who slid down the wall until sitting on the floor. "Come here." I didn't want to, but my legs took me to him. My mother, still trying to breathe properly, made a gesture with her hand for me not to come close, but I couldn't disobey my father. He put his heavy hand on my shoulder, the same hand that had just beaten my mother, and spoke very softly in my ear. "What you saw here never happened. Your mother fell by herself, hit the corner of the table. That's what happened. You understand?" I nodded yes, but he squeezed my shoulder until it hurt. "Say you understand." "I understand, Dad," I managed to whisper. "Good. Because if you tell anyone, I'm going to have to teach you too how a woman should behave in this house. And it won't just be with words, no. Understand?" At that moment, looking into his eyes up close, I understood that my childhood was completely over. I was no longer his protected daughter. I had become something else, a dangerous witness who needed to be controlled. In the following months, the house became hell. My father found any excuse to beat my mother. If the food was too hot, if it was cold, if she took too long to answer when he arrived, if she said something he didn't like. And always, always, he made sure I saw it. It was as if he wanted to teach me something, you know? As if he was showing me what a woman's place was in his house. I noticed he looked at me during the beatings he gave her, checking if I was paying attention, if I was learning the lesson. My mother started to become different, thinner, quieter, always with marks on her body that she tried to hide with clothes. She stopped singing while working, stopped smiling at the silly little things my younger siblings did. It was as if the joy had dried up inside her. And the worst part is that she started to distance herself from me too. I think she was afraid that if we got too close, he'd get jealous or suspicious. So she spoke to me only what was necessary, gave me orders about what to do in the house, but never again had those moments of affection we had before. One night, I woke up to strange noises coming from their room. I thought it was another fight, but it was different. It was my mother moaning softly, as if in pain, and my father saying something that disgusted me. "Stop crying, Elizabeth. It's your wifely duty. And now it's also your punishment for leaving the house yesterday without telling me." I covered my ears and pretended I was sleeping, but I understood that he hurt her in other ways too, ways that a 15-year-old girl shouldn't even know existed. It was around this time that my father started paying more attention to me. Not in an affectionate, fatherly way, no. It was attention that made me afraid. He noticed when I was growing, when my body was changing. Sometimes I felt him watching me when I was sweeping the yard or washing dishes, and that look gave me chills. One afternoon, when my mother had gone to the store to buy flour, he came home from the ranch and found me alone at home. My siblings had gone out to play in the street. "Sandra," he called from the door, "come here." I went, drying my hands on my apron. He kept looking at me in a strange way, from top to bottom, as if evaluating something. "You're becoming a beautiful young woman," he said, getting closer, "just like your mother when she was young." Something in the way he spoke made me very afraid. I tried to move away, but he grabbed my arm. "Where are you going? Don't you like talking to your father?" "I do, Dad," I lied. "Then stay there quietly." He ran his hand over my face, in a caress that had nothing fatherly about it. "Your mother is getting old, Sandra. Tired, but you're at the perfect point." I didn't quite understand what he meant, but the fear I felt was so great that I started to tremble. That's when I heard my mother's voice coming from the street, talking to a neighbor. My father quickly let go of me and went to sit in his chair as if nothing had happened. But when my mother came into the house and saw our faces, mine of fear, his of anger at being interrupted, she understood right away what had almost happened. That night, she came to my bed after everyone was asleep and whispered in my ear, "Sandra, never be alone at home with him again. Never again. Do you promise me?" I promised, but deep down I knew that such a promise would be hard to keep. My father was smart, patient. He knew how to wait for the right time, and I felt that time was getting closer every day. My mother knew it too. Lately, she looked at me with such a deep sadness in her eyes that it seemed like she was saying goodbye to me, as if she knew she wouldn't be able to protect me for much longer. And she really couldn't. My dear ones, the last straw that broke the camel's back happened on a Tuesday in December 1961. It was the time of the late Christmas bazaar in Clarksville. You know how it is. In small towns, the festivities extend. And there was a prayer meeting at the Baptist church that my mother always attended. She had asked my father's permission to go, and he had let her, but with one condition. She had to come back before sunset. That day, the prayer meeting went longer than normal because the pastor had announced some important things about building the new chapel. My mother had stayed to help the other ladies organize the church benches and clean the candlesticks after the prayer. When she got home, it was already getting dark, and I saw on her face the desperation of someone who knew they were going to pay dearly for that delay. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard her footsteps coming through the yard. My heart raced because I knew my father was waiting, sitting in that wooden chair of his in the living room, looking at the wall clock that mercilessly marked the hours. When he heard her footsteps, he didn't even look at the door. He just spoke, with that icy voice I already knew well. "What time is it, Elizabeth?" "Bob, I can explain," she started, taking the veil off her head with trembling hands. "The pastor asked the ladies to help." I asked what time it is. He cut her off mid-sentence without even raising his eyes from the floor. It's almost 7 at night," she whispered, and I saw her little hands were already trembling. "And what time did I tell you to come back?" "Before sunset," she answered, and her voice came out so low you could barely hear it. "So you disobeyed me." He slowly got up from the chair, and I dropped the wooden spoon I was stirring the beans with. My blood froze. "In front of the whole neighborhood, you disobeyed me. You made light of my authority." I ran out of the kitchen and saw my siblings, who were playing in the yard with some sticks and pebbles. They felt the heavy atmosphere and ran inside the house. Little Thomas, who was only 6 years old, clung to my mother's skirt, sensing danger like a frightened animal. "Get out of there, boy," my father ordered my brother, with that voice that didn't accept disobedience. "Go play outside and take the others." "No, Dad," I spoke, in a courage that I don't know where it came from. The words came out of my mouth before I could even think properly. "Let him stay. He didn't do anything wrong. Nobody here did anything wrong." The silence that descended on the house was terrible. It was as if even the crickets outside had stopped singing. My father turned to me very slowly, with a face I had never seen, a face of pure hatred that made me want to run and hide. "You want to learn along with her, too?" he asked, and his voice was so low, so dangerous, that it gave me chills. "Is that it? Want to learn how women should respect men in this house?" My mother, seeing the danger I had put myself in, pushed Thomas in my direction. "Take the children, Sandra. Take them and get out of here. Go to Mrs. Wilson's house and stay there until I come get you." But I couldn't move. For the first time in my life, I stood there, planted in the middle of the living room, looking into my father's eyes. There was a voice inside my head screaming for me to run, but there was another voice, stronger, saying I couldn't abandon my mother. "I won't let you beat her for going to church," I said, and the words came out firmer than I expected. She was in God's house, helping the pastor. She didn't do anything wrong. What happened next was an explosion of violence that still gives me nightmares. My father went to his room and came back with the leather belt he used to work on the ranch. It was a thick, heavy belt with a large metal buckle that he always kept well polished. When I saw him coming back with that thing in his hand, I felt my legs go weak. "Now you two are going to learn once and for all what a woman's place is in this house," he said, folding the belt and testing its weight in his hand. First he went after my mother. She tried to run, but he reached her before she got to the door. The first blow hit her back, and the sound of the leather hitting was terrible, like a whip cracking. My mother screamed and fell to her knees on the dirt floor. 26 years married to me," he said between the blows. and you still haven't learned to obey." The belt went up and down, up and down. The metal buckle cut through her clothes and skin, and I saw the blood starting to appear. My mother tried to protect herself with her arms, but the blows were many and very strong. "Stop! Stop hitting her!" I screamed, and before I could think about what I was doing, I threw myself over my mother, trying to protect her with my own body. That's when he turned all the rage on me. The belt started falling on my back, on my head, on my arms. The pain was unbearable. It was like they were cutting my skin with a razor. Each blow from the metal buckle left a deep cut, and I felt the blood soaking my clothes. "A child who confronts me?" he shouted, without stopping the beating. "A child who doesn't respect her father? Then you'll learn together." My siblings were crying in the corner of the room, hugging each other, seeing that scene of horror. Little Thomas screamed, "Stop, Dad! Stop! You're going to kill her!" But that only increased his rage. It was as if seeing the children cry, seeing the fear on their faces, only fueled the violence even more. My mother, even bleeding, even broken with pain, managed to get up from the floor. I'll never forget her face at that moment. It was a face of total desperation, of a mother who knew she could lose her daughter if she didn't do something. "Stop hitting my daughter," she shouted, with a strength I had never seen in her. "Kill me if you want, but leave her alone. She's a child." And then she did something that changed everything. She threw herself on top of him and tried to snatch the belt from his hand. For a few seconds, they fought over the belt, pulling to each side. My mother was using a strength that came from desperation, the strength of a mother protecting her child. "Let go of that belt, Robert," she screamed, trying to twist his arm. "Enough! That's enough!" For a moment, it seemed like she was going to make it. She was managing to loosen his fingers, was almost taking the belt from his hand. But my father was much stronger, and the rage had given him extra strength. He gave her a push with all the strength he had. A violent, brutal push that made my mother fly through the air and hit her head on the corner of the heavy wooden table that was in the living room. The noise was terrible, a dry sound, like wood cracking, that echoed through the whole house. My mother fell to the floor and lay motionless, with a trickle of blood running from her forehead and spreading across the dirt floor. For a few seconds that seemed like hours. No one moved. The whole world stopped. Even my father stood there, looking at her lying there, with the belt still in his hand. It was as if he himself had been startled by what had just happened. "Mom?" I called softly, dragging myself to her. My voice came out strange, almost a whisper. "Mom, get up. Please get up." But she didn't move. Her eyes were open, but it was as if they weren't seeing anything. They were glazed, lost, looking at a place only she could see. I shook her shoulder. "Mom, answer. Talk to me." That's when she turned her head to me, slowly, very slowly, as if every movement hurt a lot. She managed to whisper with her voice almost fading. "Sandra, my daughter, listen. Listen carefully." "Talk, Mom. I'm listening," I cried, holding her cold hand. "When he sleeps, when he relaxes, you run. Go to Mrs. Wilson's house. Tell everything that happened here. Promise?" "No, Mom, don't talk like that," I cried even more. "We're going to leave here together." "Right now, I'll help you get up and we'll leave." But she shook her head, almost imperceptibly. "No, I can't get up. Sandra, there's something important. Pay attention to his belt. When he takes it off, look carefully at the belt." "What belt, Mom? Why the belt?" "Look carefully. There's blood. It's not just yours. It's not just mine." She was making a terrible effort to speak, as if each word was a mountain. "There was already before. Today, there was already—" At that moment, I didn't completely understand what she wanted to say, but I engraved each word in my memory. My father, who had been standing still this whole time, suddenly reacted. He approached us and said, in a voice that tried to be normal, "She just hit her head. She'll be fine. It's just a bump. Help her get up." But when I tried to help my mother sit up, she groaned in such strong pain that it broke my heart. There was something very wrong happening inside her body. "She needs a doctor," I told my father, trying to keep my voice steady. "She needs to go to the hospital in Montgomery now." "No hospital," he replied dryly, putting the belt back in his pants as if nothing had happened. "She just needs to rest. Tomorrow she'll be fine. Women are resilient." That night was the longest of my life. I carried my mother to her room, with William's help. She lay in bed, moaning softly from time to time, breathing in a strange way, as if each breath was a struggle. I sat on the floor beside the bed, holding her hand, feeling her getting colder and colder. Every hour I'd wet a cloth in the water basin and pass it on her forehead, cleaning the blood that wouldn't stop coming out. My father, after eating dinner, as if nothing had happened, went to sleep. I heard him snoring in the next room, a heavy snore of someone who slept peacefully, without any remorse. It was almost dawn when my mother opened her eyes and looked at me with a clarity that scared me. It was as if she had come back for a few minutes just to give me an important message. "Sandra, pay attention. Listen carefully. His belt, look carefully, when he takes it off, on the buckle. There's old blood, dried blood. It's not from today. There was already. From other times." "Mom, what other times?" "The times that I fell, the times that tripped. He always used the belt, always—" She paused, breathing with difficulty. "On the buckle, there's hair, my hair, stuck, for years." At that moment, a terrible truth began to form in my head. The falls down the stairs, the bruises, the purple marks she always explained as accidents. It had all been him. It had always been him. "Sandra, when I'm not here anymore, he'll want you in my place. Promise. Don't let him. Promise you'll tell. Everyone." "Mom, stop talking like that. You're going to be fine. Tomorrow, we're leaving here." But she shook her head. "I won't. I won't make it. But you can. You have to." She closed her eyes and didn't speak anymore. Her breathing became weaker and weaker, more and more spaced out. I stayed there, holding her hand, feeling life slip away little by little. When the sun rose, illuminating the room with a golden light that came through the small window, my mother wasn't breathing anymore. My father woke up, saw her there motionless, and put on an act that disgusted me. He started crying, calling her, pretending desperation. "Elizabeth, my wife, wake up. Don't leave me alone." He called the neighbor, Mr. Charlie from the store, to help take her to the doctor. But everyone already knew it was too late. Dr. Stevens, who was the only doctor in Clarksville at that time, came to our house, examined her, and confirmed it was a massive heart attack. Her heart couldn't take the shock of the fall. And that's how my mother became one more woman who died of a heart attack in Clarksville. One more victim that no one questioned. One more secret that was buried with her. But I knew the truth. And worse, I knew that now I was next in line. When everyone left the wake, when the dust settled, I was going to occupy the place my mother had left vacant. Only this time, it would be different. Because my mother had given me a weapon. She had taught me to look at his belt. And I was going to look very carefully. My dear ones, my mother's wake was scheduled for the next day, on a Thursday. In Clarksville, back then, when someone died, the whole town stopped to pay their condolences. Our small house was packed with people, neighbors, friends, acquaintances from the ranch where my father worked, church ladies who came to pray the rosary. My father was playing the role of grieving widower with a perfection that disgusted me. He had put on the nicest black suit he had combed his hair with brilliantine, and received condolences with a face of suffering that fooled everyone. Poor Bob, I heard Mrs. Wilson whispering to another neighbor. Lost his wife like that, out of nowhere. A heart attack, so young still. Yeah, poor him, the other replied. And now he'll have to raise all these children alone. I was sitting in a corner of the living room, dressed in a black dress the neighbor had lent me, pretending I was in mourning. But inside, I was boiling with rage. Every time someone came to give me their condolences, saying, "Your mother was a saint," or "She's in a better place now," I wanted to scream the truth. It was during the afternoon that I noticed my father doing something strange. He was talking to Mr. Charlie from the store, receiving condolences, when he took off his belt. He said it was too tight, that nervousness had made him swell. He hung the belt on a chair near where I was sitting. At that moment, I remembered my mother's last words. Look carefully at the belt. I waited for everyone to get distracted with the prayers the ladies were doing around the coffin. Slowly, without drawing attention, I got closer to the chair where the belt was hanging. What I saw froze my blood to the bone. The metal buckle, which my father always kept polished and shiny, had dark stains encrusted in the folds. They weren't rust or dirt stains. It was blood, my dear ones. Dried blood, dark, that had been there for a long time. And even worse, stuck in the corners of the buckle, there were strands of hair. Light brown hair, the exact same color as my mother's hair. At that moment, everything made sense. The falls she had, the purple bruises that appeared on her body, the times she tripped on the stairs or hit the corner of the door. It hadn't been any of that. It had been that belt. Always that belt. My father hadn't killed my mother just the day before. He had been killing her little by little, beating by beating, for years. And no one had ever suspected anything. I was there looking at that terrible proof when I felt a heavy hand on my shoulder. It was my father. "What are you doing there, Sandra?" he asked softly, so no one would hear. "Nothing, Dad. Just saw the belt that fell from the chair." He looked at me with those hard eyes. "Leave that belt there. Don't mess with other people's things." But there was something in the way he spoke, a rush to get me away from there, that made me understand he knew exactly what I had seen, and I knew he knew that I knew. That night, after everyone left, and only our family was left in the empty house with my mother's coffin, my father called me to talk in the yard. "Sandra," he said, lighting a cigarette and slowly releasing the smoke. "Tomorrow, after the burial, things are going to change here at home." "How so, Dad?" "Your mother is no longer here to take care of the house, to care for your younger siblings. You're the oldest now. It's your responsibility to take her place." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What place, Dad?" "The place of the woman of the house, taking care of the food, cleaning, the boys, and taking care of me, too." He took a long drag on the cigarette and looked at me in a way that made me want to run. "The way your mother took care of me." At that moment, I understood everything. He wasn't just talking about household chores. He was talking about me becoming his new victim, taking my mother's place in every sense. And if I refused, if I disobeyed, that belt would be used on me too. I'm still a child, Dad. I'm only 15 years old. Old enough to learn. Your mother was 15 when she married me. And look how well she learned. He threw the cigarette on the ground and stepped on it. "You'll learn too, Sandra. The easy way or the hard way." That dawn, lying on the floor next to my mother's coffin, because it was tradition for someone from the family to stay watching over the body, I made the most important decision of my life. I wasn't going to let him break me like he broke her. I wasn't going to die slowly like my mother died. And I wasn't going to let that man keep pretending he was a victim of fate when in reality he was a murderer. On the day of the burial, which was on a Friday, the whole town went to the Clarksville cemetery. The pastor was about to start the final prayer when I did something that surprised everyone. I got up from the bench where I was sitting and walked to the front of the cemetery chapel where the pastor was with the prayer book in his hand. Everyone went quiet, looking at me, thinking I was going to say something beautiful about my mother. "Pastor," I said, with a voice firmer than I imagined I could manage, "before you start the prayer, I wanted to show something important to everyone who's here." The pastor, who was a kind man named Pastor Michael, was surprised. "What is it, my child?" Without saying anything else, I turned my back to the crowd and lifted my blouse. On my back, there were still fresh and bloody marks from my father's belt. Deep cuts made by the metal buckle, purple and black bruises that covered the entire length of my back. A murmur of horror ran through the crowd. I heard some women scream in shock, others started to cry. The pastor himself was speechless for a few seconds. Then I turned to face everyone and pointed to my father, who was sitting in the first row with the face of someone who had seen a ghost. "The same belt that did this to me last night, killed my mother the night before. He's not a widower, people. He's the murderer." The silence that descended on the cemetery was total. It was as if even the birds had stopped singing. Everyone looked at me, then at my father, then at me again, trying to process what they had just heard. My father got up from the bench as if to say something, but I didn't let him. "He's been killing her slowly for years. All those times she fell down the stairs, that she tripped, that she hit the door. It was a lie. It was him beating her with this belt." "Sandra, you're disturbed by grief." He started to speak, trying to use that worried father voice that fooled everyone. "Disturbed nothing," I shouted. "Look at his belt. Look at the buckle. There's dried blood from my mother stuck there, and there's her hair too, hair that he pulled out from the beatings he gave her." That's when something happened that I didn't expect. Mrs. Wilson, who had known my mother since she was a girl, got up from the middle of the crowd. I always suspected, always thought it was strange, so many accidents. She was crying, but I was afraid to say something. I was afraid of him. Other voices began to join hers. That's right, Elizabeth always had new marks. She became different in recent times. Thinner, quieter. Sergeant Thompson, who was the law enforcement representative in Clarksville, was present at the burial. He approached me. "Girl, are you sure of what you're saying? It's a very serious accusation." "I'm sure, yes, sir, and I can prove it." I looked directly into my father's eyes, who was as pale as paper. "Ask him to take off his belt. Ask to examine the buckle. You'll see my mother's blood that's still there." My father tried to back away, but there were already too many people around him. Sergeant Thompson was firm. "Robert, you're going to have to cooperate. Take off the belt." "This is absurd. My daughter is deranged with grief," my father protested. "I won't submit to this humiliation." But the sergeant wasn't joking. "Either you take it off or I take it off. You choose." With trembling hands, my father took the belt off his pants. The sergeant took the metal buckle and examined it carefully. After a few seconds, his face completely changed. "Good Lord," he murmured. "There really is dried blood here, and strands of hair." He looked at the crowd. "The girl is telling the truth." What happened next was like a storm. Everyone started talking at the same time, asking questions, looking at my father with disgust and anger. Some women came to hug me, crying with me. Others went to look at my mother's coffin with different eyes, finally understanding how she had really died. Sergeant Thompson arrested my father right there, in front of everyone. "Robert Silva, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder. We're going to exhume your wife's body for a more detailed investigation." When they took him away in handcuffs, he still tried to look at me with anger, as if I were to blame for everything. But I didn't lower my eyes. I looked back, firmly, until he disappeared in the dust raised by the police car. My mother's burial happened that same day, but now it was different. Now everyone knew the truth. Now she was no longer the woman who died of a heart attack. She was the woman who was murdered by her own husband, slowly, for years. And I, who had spent 15 years of my life afraid of him, was finally free. The marks on my body healed over time. But they had served as the map that led my father to jail and saved my own life. The Clarksville justice system later confirmed what I already knew. My mother had died of internal bleeding caused by head trauma. The heart attack was invented to hide the crime. My father was sentenced to 20 years in prison for murder and abuse. My siblings and I went to live with our Aunt Helen, my mother's sister, who received us with all the love in the world. And it was there that I began to understand that not all men are like my father, that not all families live in fear, that it's possible to live in peace. My dear ones, here I am today, at 78 years old, telling you this story from my simple little house in Eastwood, Birmingham. It seems impossible that that 15-year-old girl who confronted her own father in a cemetery in Clarksville is the same grandma who's here now, making biscuits early in the morning to sell at the park. Life after that day completely changed. My siblings and I went to live with our Aunt Helen, who was a widow and lived in a bigger house, also in Alabama. She received us with a love I didn't even know existed. For the first time in my life, I knew what it was like to live in a house where people talked without fear, where no one lowered their voice when the man arrived, where children could play and laugh without worrying about waking anyone up. Aunt Helen was a strong, hard-working woman who sewed for others to support herself. She taught me to sew too, and for a few years that's how we lived, me helping her with sewing, taking care of my younger siblings, and slowly learning what it was like to have a real family. It was at Aunt Helen's house that I met my late husband, Joseph. He was the son of a friend of hers, a good, hard-working young man who had come from Birmingham to spend the holidays in Clarksville. I was 17 when we met, and he was the first person who made me understand that men could be affectionate without being violent, that they could have authority without being tyrants. We dated for 2 years, always under Aunt Helen's supervision, as was customary at that time. In 1964, when I turned 19, we got married at the Baptist church, the same one where my mother used to go to her prayer meetings. It was a simple wedding, but full of joy. Aunt Helen made my wedding dress with her own hands, and the whole neighborhood came to bless us. Shortly after the wedding, we came to live here in Birmingham. Joseph worked as a mechanic in a shop downtown, and I continued sewing at home. Our life was simple, but it was ours. We had 3 children: Catherine, who is now 58 years old and lives in Atlanta, William, who is 56 and works as a truck driver here in Birmingham, and the baby Mary, who is 52 years old and is a teacher at a school here in the neighborhood. Joseph was a wonderful husband for all the 45 years we lived together. He died 13 years ago of pneumonia, but left a good longing, you know? A longing for someone who lived a life of love, respect, companionship. Never, in all those years, did he raise his hand to me, never yelled at me. When we had any disagreement, we talked, like civilized people. Today, my routine is very calm. I wake up every day at 5 in the morning, make my strong black coffee, a habit from the Clarksville days, and start preparing the biscuits. I buy fresh flour at Joe's Market, which is right near my house. I season them with sharp cheddar cheese. Sometimes I make some sweet ones with honey when I have a little extra money. I take the biscuits to the park around 7 in the morning. I already have my regular customers, Mr. Anthony, who works at the bakery and always buys 2 savory biscuits, Mrs. Mary, who comes to get a sweet one for her afternoon snack, the kids who pass by going to school and always stop to buy a little biscuit from Grandma Sandra, as they call me. I really enjoy talking to people at the park. I listen to some people's problems, give advice to others, hear the neighborhood news. It's a simple life, but it's my life, built with my own effort, without fear, without violence. In the afternoon when I come home, I get visits from my grandchildren. Junior, who is Mary's son, always comes to do homework with me. He's 12 years old and too smart. He wants to know everything, asks 1,000 questions about what life was like in the old days. Sometimes I tell some stories, the good stories, of course, about what Clarksville was like in my time, about the games we played in the street. I have 4 other grandchildren, too. 2 of Catherine's children, who live in Atlanta, and 2 of William's daughters, who come to visit me every weekend. The house becomes a party when they're all here. We make a big lunch, talk, laugh, and I look at this family I helped form and thank God for giving me the strength to get here. In the evening, I like to sit on my house's porch and water my plants. I have ferns, petunias, some small roses I planted in an old can. It's my moment of peace when I reflect on life, on how much I've been through, on how much I've achieved. Sometimes, when I'm there watering the plants, watching the movement on the street, I remember my mother. I think about what she would say if she saw how our family turned out, how the children she protected grew up well, how her grandchildren are happy and healthy. I think she'd be proud, proud to see that her sacrifice wasn't in vain. My brother Thomas lives nearby too. He works as a construction worker and comes to visit me every Tuesday. We have coffee together and talk about the old days. William, my brother, not my son, still lives in Alabama, has a big family there. Franny got married and moved to New York, but always sends news. Here in Birmingham, in Eastwood, I feel at home. This is where I built my real life, where I raised my children, where I grew old beside Joseph. When I go out in the morning to sell the biscuits and see the city's movement, people running to work, children going to school, I feel enormous gratitude for being alive, for having made it here. I don't have luxury, I don't have material wealth, but I have something many people don't have. I have peace. I have the peaceful sleep of someone who did what had to be done, who faced fears, who chose the truth even when it was dangerous. I have the joy of seeing my grandchildren growing up in a family where love truly exists, where women are respected, where children can be children. And each biscuit I sell, each smile I receive at the park, each hug from my grandchildren is proof that it was worth fighting. It was worth having courage that day at the cemetery. It was worth breaking the silence. My dear ones, after telling you this whole story, my heart is heavy but also full of hope. Heavy because remembering all this still hurts, even after so many years. But full of hope because I know my story can help someone who's going through a similar situation. If you who are listening to me now live in a house where you're afraid, where you're beaten, where you're humiliated, where someone hurts you and then pretends nothing happened, I want to tell you something very important. This is not normal. It's not a man's way. It's not family custom. It's not punishment you deserve. It's a crime, and you don't have to take it. I know it's hard to report. I know that fear hits, that shame, that thought of, who's gonna believe me? I went through that too. I spent years seeing my mother get beaten and didn't know what to do, didn't know how to help. But when I reached my limit, when I saw that either I did something or I was going to die like her, I found a courage I didn't even know I had. Courage doesn't come out of nowhere, my children. It comes when we understand that our life is worth more than fear. When we understand that we weren't born to be anyone's punching bag. When we understand that our children, our siblings, deserve to live in a house where no screaming is heard, no violence is seen. That belt dirty with blood that my father used to beat me and kill my mother became the evidence that put him in jail. The marks on my back, which hurt so much, became the map that led me to freedom. Sometimes, our wounds are the only witnesses we have. Don't be ashamed to show them when necessary. Today, when I see my grandchildren playing in the yard without fear, when I see my daughter being respected by her husband, when I sleep peacefully without hearing screams or blows, I'm grateful I had courage that day at the cemetery. It was the hardest decision of my life, but it was the one that saved me. And for you who can help someone, pay attention to the signs. That neighbor who always has bruises from falls, that friend who's getting quieter and quieter, that relative who isolated herself from the family. Sometimes an offer of help, you can count on me, can be the difference between someone's life and death. In any country in the world, there are authorities and organizations ready to help those who suffer domestic violence. Look for them in your region. Seek help from the police, hospitals, churches, schools. Dignity and respect are universal values, no matter where you are. My dear ones who followed me to the end of this story, you who had the courage to hear this difficult truth, do something for this grandma here. Subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel and turn on the notification bell. It's not just to help the channel grow, no. It's because stories like this need to be told, need to reach those who need to hear them. How many women out there are suffering in silence like my mother suffered? How many children are afraid like I was? And leave just one word in the comments, one word that proves you watched until the end. Write strength. Because that's what saved me. That's what can save other people too. Do it now. Don't wait another minute. This story can reach someone who needs it today, at this exact moment. A hug full of affection from Grandma Sandra. May God bless you and protect your families. In the first nights of our new home with my husband, my father broke into my house with a rope and a pacifier. He said, "Daddy came to get his little girl back. For 20 years, he treated me like a baby who would never grow up." Hi, my dear ones. Hello to all of you. It's so wonderful to have your company here with me today. Come on in, have a seat. Make yourselves comfortable because this grandma has a story to tell that still makes me tremble when I remember it. But first things first, let me introduce myself properly. My name is Laura Beatrice Thompson. I'm 78 years old, and I was born right here in Asheville, North Carolina, where I still live today. This is a beautiful mountain town, you know? In winter, we wake up to frost covering everything, and the smell of fresh coffee fills the houses early in the morning. I love this town, despite everything I went through here. These days, my dears, my life is nice and peaceful, thank God. Every morning I wake up early, around 6 o'clock, and the first thing I do is put the coffee pot on to make a nice hot cup. My George, who I was married to for 53 years, may God rest his soul, he passed away 5 years ago. He taught me how to make coffee just right with those good beans we buy at the local market. While I drink my coffee, I sit here on the front porch, wrapped in a wool shawl that my granddaughter Julia made for me, just watching the street come to life. Before I start my real story, I'd like to ask you something. If you can, please click that like button down there. Julia explained to me that this helps the video reach more people. And subscribe to Grandparents' Tales too, okay? Turn on the notification bell, because I'm going to share more stories here, stories that need to be told. And you, my dear ones watching me right now, tell me in the comments, what little town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? In the morning with breakfast, after lunch, or in the evening? I always read all the comments. Julia helps me, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, will you? Let's create a chain of love. Now, my children, settle in because the story I'm going to tell today is difficult. It's about my father, about a sick obsession that almost destroyed my life, and about the incredible man who saved me using only his intelligence. It's about the night my father broke into my house with a rope and a pacifier, determined to take me back to the past. But it's also about love, courage, and liberation. Take a deep breath with me, because we're going back many years in time, to the 1940s, when I was just a girl growing up here in Asheville, in a very different time from today. Part 1. Childhood in the Mountains. I was born in 1947, at the very end of winter, when Asheville was still covered in frost. My mother, whose name was Madeline Thompson, everyone called her Maddie, always told me that on the day I was born, she looked out the window of the little room where she had me and saw the pine trees all covered with ice sparkling in the morning sun. She said it was a sign from God that I would be a strong girl, capable of withstanding life's cold. My father's name was Ernest Augustus Thompson. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, worked as a carpenter right here in Asheville. He had a small workshop on the street below where he made custom furniture, tables, chairs, wardrobes, those kinds of things. I remember the smell of fresh wood he'd bring home on his clothes every evening. I remember his big hands, always with wood splinters under his nails, calloused from so much work. My mother, Maddie, was a petite woman, delicate with that sweet way about her. She took care of the house, cooked like nobody else. She made pot roast that was wonderful, and a pecan pie that melted in your mouth. She also sewed for others, took in clothes from other families to hem, sew buttons, mend tears. It was her extra money, which she kept in a cookie tin hidden in the cupboard. I had an older brother, Arnold, who was 7 years older than me. When I was little, Arnold was almost a young man, always running around the street with friends, playing marbles, flying kites. He didn't have much patience with me, thought little girls were a nuisance. But once in a while he'd take me along to play at the field near our house, and I'd be so proud to walk with my big brother. We lived in a simple wooden house near downtown Asheville. It was a small house, painted light blue. My father had painted it himself, with a little white gate in front and a small backyard. It had only 3 rooms: the living room, which was also the kitchen, my parents' bedroom, and a tiny little room where Arnold and I slept, him in a twin bed and me in a small bed against the wall on the other side. In winter, my dears, that house was freezing. We'd wake up and see our breath coming out like smoke. My mother would light the wood stove early, and we'd all huddle together there in the kitchen so we wouldn't freeze to death. She'd make strong black coffee, cut thick slices of homemade bread, and spread butter on them, and we'd eat right there, standing up near the stove, waiting for the sun to warm things up a bit. My father, Ernest, was always a man very dedicated to his family. He worked from sunup to sundown in his carpentry shop, came home tired, but always had a smile for my mother and a pat on the head for me. He called me my little princess, and when I was very small, he'd pick me up and sing those old songs, nursery rhymes, while I fell asleep on his shoulder. I remember he was very protective of me, more than he was with Arnold. If I fell and scraped my knee playing in the yard, he'd get upset, grab my mother complaining, "Maddie, aren't you watching the girl? She got hurt." My mother would laugh, say that children were meant to play and get hurt, that it was part of it. But my father didn't like it, worried too much. I spent my days playing in the yard or in the street with other girls from the neighborhood. We played with dolls. I had a rag doll that my mother had made, with button eyes and a little flowered dress. Played house, played cooking, made toy stoves from old cans and little clay pots. In summer, when it warmed up a bit, we'd go to the creek that ran nearby, dip our feet in the cold water, catch tadpoles in jelly jars. I had a little friend, Bernice, who lived 3 houses down. We were inseparable. Spent our afternoons at her house or she at mine, making up games, telling secrets. Her mother made wonderful sweet bread with that crispy crust on top, and whenever I went there, she'd give me a warm piece with butter melting on it. My childhood was happy, you know. At least up to a point it was. We were poor, but we didn't lack anything. Had food on the table, had clean clothes, had love. My mother was affectionate, my father hard-working, my brother, well, he was a big brother, kind of grumpy, but he liked me in his own way. But there was something I started to notice when I got older, around 9, 10 years old. My father didn't like it when I played with boys. If any little boy from the street came over to play hide-and-seek or marbles, my father would stand at the window, arms crossed, watching with that stern face. Once the son of Mr. Theodore, a skinny boy named Norman, came to call me to fly kites with the gang. My father came out to the gate and said very seriously, "She's not going. Girls don't fly kites with boys." I didn't understand because Arnold flew kites with everyone and nobody said anything. My mother also thought it was strange. Once I heard her talking quietly with him in the kitchen at night when they thought I was asleep. She said, "Ernest, the girl needs to play with everyone. That's normal. You're being way too protective." And he replied with that deep voice of his, "Maddie, you don't understand. This girl is different. She's special. I'm not going to let the world ruin her." At the time, I didn't really understand what that meant. But today, looking back, I see there was already something there, something that wasn't normal, that was beginning to grow in my father's mind. When I turned 11, my father gave me a porcelain doll as a gift, one of those expensive ones, with eyes that closed when you laid it down. It was beautiful, all in a pink lace dress. But I was already becoming a young lady, didn't play with dolls much anymore. I felt embarrassed, but thanked him, gave him a kiss. He held my face between his big hands, looked right into my eyes and said, "You'll always be my little girl, Laura, always." At the time, that just seemed like a loving father talking. But it wasn't. It was a promise, or a sentence. The years went by, and I grew up. My body changed. I became a young lady. My mother started teaching me women's things, explained about that time of the month, started teaching me how to cook properly, to wash clothes, to iron. She'd say, "Laura, soon you'll be a young woman. You'll get married. You'll have your own home. You need to learn these things." But my father seemed unwilling to see that I was growing up. He still treated me like I was a small child. Still called me little princess. Still wanted me to sit on his lap when we listened to the radio at night. I was already 12 years old, already getting embarrassed, but he insisted. I remember one specific day, shortly before I turned 13. I was in the backyard helping my mother hang laundry on the line. It was a beautiful sunny day, and we were talking, laughing. My mother was telling me stories of when she was young, how she had met my father. Suddenly my father appeared at the kitchen door with that strange, kind of empty look. He just stood there, staring at me as if seeing something no one else saw. My mother noticed, called to him, "Ernest, is everything okay?" He blinked, came back to himself, and went inside without saying anything. My mother was worried, I saw. She held my hand and said quietly, "Laura, if your father if he ever does something weird, you tell me, okay?" I didn't understand, but agreed. But I never got a chance to tell her anything, because 3 months later, when I had just turned 13, my mother Maddie died. Part 2. After Mother's death. My mother Maddie died of pneumonia that she caught in the winter of 1960. It all happened so fast, my dears. 1 week she was fine, taking care of the house, sewing. The next, she was bedridden, with high fever, coughing so hard her whole body shook. My father called the doctor, Dr. Anderson, who was the town doctor, but it was too late. The pneumonia had taken over her lungs. I remember the day she died like it was yesterday. It was a gray, cold afternoon, with that icy wind that cuts through your skin. I was sitting by her bed, holding her hand, and she looked at me with those tired eyes and said very quietly, "Laura, my daughter, take care of your father. He's going to need you very much." Then she looked at my father, who was on the other side of the bed, and said, "Ernest, our girl is growing up. Let her grow, my dear. Promise me." My father didn't promise anything. He just stayed there, holding her hand, crying silently. She closed her eyes that afternoon and didn't open them again. She was only 38 years old. The wake was in our living room, which was the custom back then. Neighbors came, friends from church, the ladies from the neighborhood who had sewing work with my mother. Everyone crying, praying the rosary, talking about Maddie, how good she was, hard-working, kind. My father sat the whole time in a chair near the casket, not talking to anyone. He just looked at her with an expression I'd never seen before. It was a mix of pain, anger, and something else I couldn't identify. After the funeral, the house became empty, you know? It felt like it had lost its light. My mother was the sun of that house, and without her, everything became dark and cold. My brother Arnold, who was already 20, stayed with us for 2 more weeks and then announced he was leaving. He had gotten a job in Charlotte at a furniture factory and was going to try life there. I cried so much when he left. I begged him to take me with him, but he said he couldn't, that I was too young, that I had to stay and take care of Father, and that's how I was left alone with him, alone with my father Ernest. At first, he was very quiet. Spent his days at the carpentry shop, working in silence, came home at night, ate what I prepared. I had learned to cook from my mother, thank God, and went to sleep. He barely spoke to me. It was like he had become a statue of sadness. But after about 3 months, things started to change. And they changed in a way that scared me. I started noticing he was looking at me differently. It wasn't a bad look. It wasn't. It wasn't that kind of thing that sometimes happens, thank God. It was something else. It was like he looked at me and didn't see the 13-year-old Laura that I was. It was like he saw a small child. One day I was in the kitchen making dinner. I remember it was a pot roast, and he came home early from the carpentry shop. He came in, looked me up and down, and suddenly said, "Laura, what are those clothes?" I was wearing a simple skirt that my mother had made for me, a skirt I'd been wearing for months. "It's my skirt, Dad," I replied, not understanding. He shook his head with that serious face and said, "No, not that. Little girls don't wear skirts like that. Go put on that little girl dress that's in your closet." I didn't know what to say. "But Dad, that dress is too small for me. I wore it when I was 10. He slammed his hand on the table hard, and I got scared. "I told you to change your clothes, Laura. Obey your father." I ran to the bedroom, scared, and went to look for that dress. I found it at the back of the closet, tight, way too short. I put it on with difficulty, could barely close the seams. When I came back to the kitchen, he looked at me, and for the first time in months, he smiled. "That's it. That's my little princess." That was just the beginning, my dears. Just the beginning. In the following weeks, he started forbidding me from doing things. He forbade me from using the lipstick my mother had given me, that light pink lipstick I wore only on Sundays to go to church. "Little girls don't wear makeup," he said, and threw the lipstick in the trash. He forbade me from putting my hair up, said I had to wear it in 2 braids like when I was a child. He forbade me from going out alone to visit Bernice. "Children don't walk alone in the street," he'd say. I tried to argue, tried to say I was already a young lady, that I was already 13, soon to be 14. But he'd get angry, yell, say I was being disobedient, that my mother was in heaven seeing me disappointing my father. And I'd shut up, scared and confused. One afternoon, I came back from school. I was still studying at the time, attending junior high, and found my father sitting in the living room with a large package in his hands. He had that little smile on his face, that little smile that had started giving me chills. "Laura, come here, my daughter. Daddy brought you a surprise." I opened the package. Inside was a big rag doll with embroidered eyes and a little calico dress. And there was also a set of toy pots and pans, those small aluminum ones, to play house. I stared at it, not understanding. "Dad, I don't play with dolls anymore. I'm almost 14. His smile disappeared instantly. His face became hard. His eyes darkened. "You will play, Laura. You'll play because I'm telling you to. Girls have to play with dolls. Sit down there now and play." He pointed to the living room floor. I looked at him, saw there was no way to argue. I sat on the floor, picked up the doll, and pretended I was playing. He stayed there, sitting in the chair, watching me with that strange, almost happy look. That's it, just like that, my little princess playing, just like before. Just like when she was tiny. My dears, I started to get very scared indeed. But I had no one to turn to. My brother was far away in Charlotte. My mother had died. My neighbors, well, back then you didn't meddle in other families' business, you know. And my father was respected in town. He was a hard-working man, had a good reputation. Who would believe me if I said he was treating me like a baby? Things got worse over time. He started treating me more and more like a child. Made me sit on his lap at night while he listened to the radio. Forced me to call him Daddy in a childish voice. Bought more toys, dolls, teddy bears, wooden puzzles. Filled my room with these things. Took away my young lady clothes and bought children's dresses, even if they were tight on me. When I turned 15, he wouldn't even let me celebrate. Wouldn't let me have a party, wouldn't let me invite friends from school. He said birthdays were grown-up nonsense and that I didn't need that. On the day, he came home with a small chocolate cake and made me blow out the candle alone, right there in the kitchen, just the two of us. Then he sang Happy Birthday with that off-key voice of his, picked me up. Imagine 15 years old and he's picking me up, and said, Daddy will always take care of his little girl. Always. Will never let the dirty world touch you. I stopped going to school when I turned 16. He said I didn't need to study anymore, that women didn't need education, that I had to stay home learning to take care of the house, to cook, to clean. Actually, I think he was afraid that at school I'd talk to someone, that I'd tell someone how he was treating me. I started living like a prisoner in my own home. Couldn't go out, couldn't have friends, couldn't do anything. Spent my days cleaning, cooking, and being forced to play with those horrible dolls he bought. At night, he'd make me sit on the living room floor, and he'd sit in the chair and watch me play, hours and hours, until I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. There was one night I tried to talk to him seriously. I gathered courage, took a deep breath, and said, "Dad, this can't go on. I need to live. I need to have friends, need to go back to school, need to grow up. This isn't right." He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something that froze my blood. It wasn't anger. It was madness. Pure madness. He slowly stood up from the chair, came to me, held my face between his hands, those big, calloused carpenter's hands, and said very quietly, almost whispering, "You're not going to grow up, Laura. You're never going to grow up. You'll always be my little girl. Always. Because when you grow up, you'll leave me, just like Maddie left me. And I'm not going to let that happen. Never." In that moment, I understood. My father had gone mad with grief. My mother's death had broken something inside his head, and he had decided that if he kept me as a child forever, I would never grow up, never get married, never leave. I would stay with him forever. I was 17 years old when I met George. Part 3. Meeting George. It was on a sunny day in March 1964 that I met George. I had just turned 17 and had gone alone, sneaking away from my father, of course, to the town square to buy sewing thread that had run out at home. My father had gone to deliver furniture across town, and I took advantage of those few minutes of freedom. I was looking at the fabric store window when I bumped into someone accidentally. I dropped the little packet of pins I had in my hand. "Sorry, miss," said a deep, kind voice. I looked up and saw a tall young man, dark-haired, with light brown eyes and a nice smile. He bent down, picked up my pins from the ground, and handed them to me. "Here you go. Don't worry about it." "Thank you," I murmured, my face burning with embarrassment. It had been so long since I'd talked to anyone from outside the house, much less a young man. "My name is George Henry Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "I work at the sheriff's office here in Asheville. I'm an administrative assistant to the sheriff. And you are—" I looked around, afraid someone would see and tell my father. "Laura," I answered quietly. "I have to go." And I almost ran away, my heart beating fast. But fate has its ways. I ran into George other times. He always showed up in that area, and later I learned it wasn't a coincidence. He had noticed something strange about me in that first meeting. The scared manner, the clothes too childish for my age, the fear in my eyes. George was an observant man, trained to notice when something wasn't right, and something in him wanted to help me. We started talking quickly, in secret, always when my father wasn't around. George would ask me about my life, about my family. At first I lied, said everything was fine. But one day I couldn't take it. I broke down in tears right there in the little park and told him everything. I told him about my father's obsession, about how he treated me like a child, about how I was trapped in that house, in that life that wasn't a life. George listened to me carefully, with that serious way of his. When I finished, he held my hand. It was the first time someone had held my hand with affection since my mother died, and said, "Laura, this isn't normal. Your father needs help. And you need to get out of this situation." But how, my dears? How could I get out? I had nowhere to go, no money, nobody. My brother Arnold was far away in Charlotte, and we barely had contact. George then proposed something. Date me, in secret, for now. I'll figure out a way to get you out of that house, I promise. And that's how our courtship began. We met in secret, always in discreet places, away from downtown where my father might see. George treated me like a young woman, like a real woman. He talked to me about serious things, made me laugh, made me feel alive for the first time in years. I had fallen in love, my dears, truly in love. For almost 3 years we managed to keep it secret. But in 1966, when I was 19, my father found out. It was late afternoon. I had gone out to buy bread at the bakery, one of the few things he still let me do alone, and met George on the corner, as planned. We talked for just a few minutes. He held my hand, gave me a quick kiss on the forehead. And that's when my father appeared. He had left the carpentry shop early and had come a different way. He saw everything. His face turned purple with rage. He came running in our direction, shouting, "Let go of my daughter! Let her go, you dog!" George stood in front of me, protecting me. "Sir, you need to calm down. Laura and I are dating. I have serious intentions toward her." My father laughed, but it was a scary laugh without joy. "Serious intentions? With my little girl? She's 5 years old. She's a child." George looked at my father with that look of someone who works with disturbed people and understood right away. "Mr. Thompson, Laura is 19 years old. She's an adult woman." "Liar!" shouted my father, and lunged at George. There was a commotion right there in the street. People gathered. Someone called the sheriff. In the end, George had to leave and I was dragged home by my father. What happened next, my dears, was the darkest period of my life. My father locked me in the house, literally. Put new locks on the doors, put bars on the windows. Said I had been a disobedient girl, that I had acted up, that I needed punishment. He started treating me even worse. Forced me to wear only baby dresses, dresses he sewed himself since he couldn't find them in my size in stores anymore. Made me sit in a high chair, one of those for babies, to eat. He even bought a baby bottle, my dears, a large bottle, and forced me to drink milk from it at night. "Babies have to have their bottle before bed," he'd say, with that glazed look of madness. I cried, begged, screamed. But it was no use. The neighbors must have heard, but nobody did anything. Back then, people didn't interfere. It's a family matter, they thought. There was one night I tried to escape. I waited for him to sleep, managed to open my bedroom window. Even with the bars, I was skinny, thought I could get through. I almost made it, already had half my body outside, when I felt those big hands pulling me back. He had woken up. He dragged me back to the bedroom, threw me on the bed, and for the first time, he raised his hand to me. He didn't hit me hard. It wasn't that kind of violence. But he slapped me across the face and yelled, "Disobedient girl, very disobedient girl, you'll go without your doll for a week." I curled up on the bed, trembling with fear and rage. That night, staring at the bedroom ceiling, I thought about giving up on everything. Thought I'd be stuck there forever, trapped in that madness, until my father died or until I went mad too. But then, one morning, there was a knock on the door. My father went to answer. It was George, accompanied by the sheriff and a pastor from the church. George had spent months gathering evidence, talking to neighbors, to the town doctor, explaining the situation. He had managed to convince the sheriff and the pastor to intervene. They entered the house, saw the state of things, the baby toys scattered around, the children's dresses, the baby bottle on the kitchen table, the bars on the windows. They saw me, 19 years old, dressed like a 5-year-old child. The pastor talked to my father for hours, explained that this wasn't love, it was imprisonment, that I needed to live, get married, have my own family. The sheriff was more direct. Either my father allowed the marriage, or he'd have to answer for false imprisonment. My father cried like a child, clutching the chair, screaming, "You're going to take my little girl away. You're going to let her go away, and I'll be alone, alone like when Maddie died." In the end, after much conversation, my father agreed. But it wasn't a happy consent. It was a defeat for him, and he made that very clear. The wedding was scheduled in a hurry, 2 weeks later in January 1967, right after I turned 20. It was in the small neighborhood church, with only a few people present: George, me, the pastor, the sheriff as witness, and some church ladies. My father didn't go. Said he wouldn't watch his daughter's death. But on the morning of the wedding, a boy arrived at the church with a note. It was from my father. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, written in his crooked handwriting, was, "You can play house, but at night children come back to the crib. Daddy always knows where his little girl is." My dears, those words chilled me. Even on my wedding day, even getting out of his house, I knew I wasn't free. My father wasn't going to give up, wasn't going to accept it. But I had George by my side, and George, without my knowing, was already preparing something to ensure that when my father tried to get me, and we knew he would try, I would be protected. Part 4. The New House and the Visits. After the wedding, George and I moved into a small single-story house he had rented in a neighborhood farther from downtown Asheville, a place called Mountain View, which at the time was very quiet, with few houses, still lots of woods. George had chosen it on purpose. He thought the farther from my father, the safer we'd be. The house was simple, white-painted wood, with a low little gate in front and a small backyard. It had 2 bedrooms, a small living room, kitchen, and bathroom. For me, my dears, that house represented everything: freedom, a fresh start, the chance to finally be a woman, be a wife, live without pretending to be a child. The first 2 days were magical. Waking up in the morning next to George, making breakfast for the 2 of us, fixing up the house our way, talking about the plans we had. He'd leave for work at the sheriff's office early in the morning, and I'd stay taking care of the house, cooking, humming while I washed clothes. In the evening, we'd sit on the porch. George would smoke a cigarette, and we'd talk about having children, about improving the house little by little, about the future that was finally ours. But on the 3rd day, my dears, reality knocked on the door. Literally. It was mid-morning. George had already left for work. I was in the kitchen making bread. I had gotten up early to knead the dough, let it rise, and was just putting the pans in the oven when I heard a noise at the front of the house. Footsteps at the little gate. My heart raced. I went to the living room window and peeked through the curtain. It was him, my father. There, standing on the other side of the gate with a large rag doll in his arms and a package under his other arm. He didn't try to open the gate. Just stood there, staring at the house with that empty look that gave me chills. I hid behind the curtain, my whole body shaking. I stayed there, peeking, praying for him to leave. He stood still for about 15 minutes, 15 minutes that felt like hours, and then left the doll leaning against the gate and walked away, walking slowly, looking back every few steps. I waited another half hour before I had the courage to open the door. I picked up the doll with disgust. There was a little note tied around its neck with string. The little girl forgot her doll at home. Daddy brought it. Daddy always takes care of what's his. I tore that note into 1,000 pieces, threw the doll in the trash, and spent the rest of the day locked inside the house, crying, scared. The bread burned in the oven. When George came home that night, he found me sitting on the kitchen floor, hugging my knees, trembling. He hugged me, carried me to the couch, and when I showed him the pieces of the note, I saw his face become hard, serious. He's not going to give up, Laura. We need to be prepared. And he didn't give up. In the following days, my father came back. Not every day, but yes, several times a week. Always at different times, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, when he knew George was working. He never knocked on the door, never yelled. Just stood there on the other side of the gate, standing like a sinister statue, looking at the house, searching for me with his eyes at the windows. And he always left something. Baby toys, pacifiers, baby bottles, diapers. Once he left a disassembled wooden crib leaning against the gate, a crib he had made himself in his carpentry shop. And there was always, always a little note. "Baby needs a crib to sleep," said one. "Daddy prepared the little girl's room," said another. "Children can't stay away from father. They get sick." My dears, I started living in a constant state of terror. I was afraid to look out the window and see him there. I was afraid to go out in the yard to hang laundry. I was afraid to go to the corner store to shop. When George left for work, I'd lock all the doors and windows, even in the heat, and stay inside, sweating, scared, waiting for him to come back. The nightmares began. Every night I dreamed that my father entered the house, tied me up with that thick rope he used in the carpentry shop, wrapped me up like a package, and dragged me back to that prison. I dreamed he put me in that crib, stuck a pacifier in my mouth, dressed me in diapers. I'd wake up screaming, sweating, and George had to calm me down, hug me, tell me it was just a nightmare, that he was there, that he wouldn't let anything happen. George tried to file a complaint at the sheriff's office. He talked to the sheriff, explained the situation, showed the notes, the things my father left at the gate. But the sheriff, who was a drinking buddy of my father's, had whiskey with him every Friday at Mr. Albert's bar, didn't want to know. Said it was a family matter, that a father has the right to visit his daughter, that leaving gifts isn't a crime. George argued, pounded the table, but it was no use. The sheriff told him to leave and stop making trouble for a working man. We tried talking to the church pastor, the same one who had married us. He came to our house, talked to us, was concerned. He promised he'd talk to my father, would try to make him understand that this wasn't normal, that I was married now, that I had my own life. But when the pastor went to my father's house, he was greeted with shouts. My father said that pastors don't meddle in family business, that Laura is his daughter and always will be, and practically threw the pastor out. We were alone, my dears, alone with that fear. The weeks went by. January turned into February. I got thinner, got deep circles under my eyes, nervous, scared by any noise. George did what he could, started coming home at lunchtime to see if I was okay, asked the neighbor next door, Mrs. Clementine, a good lady, a widow, to keep an eye out, visit me sometimes. But there was nothing that would take that fear out of me, because deep down, I knew. My father wasn't going to be content to stay at the gate forever. At some point, he was going to try to come in. At some point, he was going to try to take me by force. And that's what happened one night at the end of February. Part 5. The Night of Terror. George had stayed late at the sheriff's office, had to finish some urgent reports. I was home alone. It was almost 10 at night. I was in the kitchen finishing washing the dinner dishes, looking through the little kitchen window at the dark backyard outside, when I heard a sound that froze my blood. Someone was messing with the bedroom window. That sound of wood being forced, the creaking of old wood giving way. I dropped the plate I was holding. It fell in the sink and broke, and stood paralyzed there, my heart beating so hard I could hear the sound of it inside my head. For a second, I thought I had imagined it. But then the sound came again, and then I heard the worst sound in the world, the bedroom window opening. Someone had entered my house. I turned off the kitchen light instinctively, hid behind the table, crouching down, covering my mouth with both hands so I wouldn't scream, so I wouldn't make noise. Tears ran hot down my face. I knew who it was. I knew. "Laura?" The voice came from the bedroom. That voice I'd known since I was born, but which now filled me with dread. "Little girl, where are you? Daddy came to get you, sweetheart. Enough of this silly game of house. Let's go to the real home, to Daddy's home." I heard his footsteps. Heavy, slow steps, searching. He entered the living room. Through the crack under the table, I could see his boots, those worn leather boots he wore to work. And I saw something else that made my whole body tremble. He was dragging something on the floor, something that made a rough sound on the wood, a rope. "Daddy knows you're here, Laura. There's no use hiding. You're my little girl, mine forever. Nobody takes a daughter from her father. Nobody." He kept walking, went to the kitchen. It was dark, but he knew I was there. He could sense it. That's when I saw, in the little light coming from the street through the window, hanging around his neck, swinging as he moved, a pacifier, an old, yellowed pacifier. In that moment, my dears, everything became clear. He hadn't come just to convince me. He had come to take me by force. He was going to tie me up with that rope, drag me like an animal, and take me back to that house, to that hell. And the pacifier was to silence me, to make me become his baby again. Something inside me broke at that moment. It wasn't just fear. It was rage. Rage for 20 years of imprisonment. Rage for being treated like an object. Rage for having my life stolen. Rage for still being hunted. I wasn't going to let it happen. I'd rather die there, in that kitchen, than go back. My hand found the carving knife in the sink. I gripped it tight. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it, but I held on. If he finds me, I thought, if he tries to grab me, I'll defend myself. This time I'll defend myself. He lit a match. The yellow, flickering light illuminated his face. My dears, that was no longer the man who raised me. That was a stranger, a madman with bulging, glazed eyes, mouth open in a crooked smile that had nothing of joy in it. He had completely lost his mind. There was no going back. And it was at that exact moment that I heard the front gate burst open. Running footsteps. George's voice shouting, "Laura! Laura! Where are you? Answer me!" My father heard, quickly put out the match. I took advantage and stood up, screaming with all the strength I had. "George, here! My father's in here!" George burst through the front door, literally broke it down, and came running in. He turned on the light. My father tried to run to the bedroom, tried to get out through the window he'd entered. But George was faster, younger, stronger. He grabbed my father, they both fell to the floor, rolled, fought. I was screaming, crying. The rope fell from my father's hand. The pacifier came loose from his neck and ended up under the couch. Mrs. Clementine, the neighbor, appeared at the door with other neighbors who had heard the commotion. They helped George hold my father, who was kicking, screaming like a madman. "Let me go! She's my daughter, my little girl! I just want to take her home! She needs her daddy! She needs him!" The police came. But you know what they did, my dears? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. The sheriff arrived, looked at the situation, talked to my father outside, and decided it had been a misunderstanding. Said my father just wanted to talk to his daughter and that he had climbed through the window because we wouldn't open the door. It didn't matter that there was a rope. It didn't matter that there was a pacifier. It didn't matter that I was terrified, crying, with a knife in my hand from so much fear. The sheriff sent my father away with a warning not to come back. But I saw in my father's eyes when the police let him go. I saw him look at me before leaving, and in that look there was a promise. He was coming back. He would definitely come back. That night I couldn't close my eyes. I sat on the bed, hugging George, shaking from 4 to 6 in the morning. He stayed awake with me, holding me, stroking my hair, saying everything would be okay. But we both knew the truth. This wasn't over. And it was there, in that cold early morning at the end of February, with my father's rope still lying on the living room floor and the yellowed pacifier under the couch, that George said to me, with that determined voice of his, "Laura, he's going to try again. Sick people like that don't give up. But next time, I promise you, we'll be prepared. I'm going to protect you, no matter what." And he started planning, preparing, transforming that simple little house into a silent fortress, waiting for the next attack. Because we knew my father was coming back. And when he came back, this time, it would be different. Part 6. The Trap. In the days following that invasion, George completely changed. He had always been a calm, peaceful man, but now there was a determination in his eyes I'd never seen. He'd leave in the morning for work, but come back at lunchtime with bags full of strange things, rolls of wire, tools, pieces of metal, things I didn't understand what they were for. "What's all this, George?" I asked one of those times. He looked at me, serious, and said, "Protection, Laura. Your father's coming back, and when he comes back, we're going to be ready. But I need you to trust me, okay? Don't ask questions, just trust." I trusted. I spent the next few days watching my husband work in the house, like he was a carpenter, an electrician, an inventor. He worked on the windows, especially the bedroom one, the one my father had come through. He installed new bolts on the inside, but left it apparently easy to open from the outside. "It has to look weak," he explained. "It has to look like that's where he can get in again." He spent hours working on the bedroom floor, right under the window. He spread something that looked like glue, but I wasn't sure. He covered it with a thin rug. "If he steps here," George murmured, more to himself than to me, "his feet will stick. Not for long, but enough." Then he started working with a thin, transparent wire. It was fishing line, one of those really strong ones fishermen use to catch big fish. He tied this wire right at shin height, crossing the window entrance from one side to the other, almost invisible in the dark. "This will make him trip," George explained, testing the tension of the wire. "And when he trips—" He showed me what he had prepared. On the nightstand beside the bed, hidden behind some books, was a camera flash, except it was a powerful spotlight he had borrowed from the sheriff's office photographer. It was pointed directly at the window. "When he trips on the wire, it'll pull this mechanism here." George showed me an ingenious little system he had assembled with wire and a spring, and the spotlight will turn on right in his face. It'll blind him for a few seconds. Enough time. "Enough time for what?" I asked, still not quite understanding. George then took me to the bedroom closet. Inside, right at the top, he had hung a cargo net, kind of rolled up, held by a rope. "This rope here is connected to the headboard of the bed. When I pull, and I'll pull as soon as he falls and is blinded by the light, this net will drop right on top of him. It'll tangle him all up." My dears, I looked at all that and thought, my husband has gone crazy too. But I didn't say anything, because deep down, I knew he was right. My father was coming back, and we needed to be prepared. George explained the plan to me. "When your father tries to come in again, and he will try, Laura, I'm sure of it, you're going to pretend you're sleeping. No matter what happens, you stay quiet in bed. I'll be beside you, also pretending. Let him come in, let him step on the wire, and then I'll take care of the rest." We spent 3 nights awake, waiting. 3 nights of vigil, lying in bed, tense, listening to every little noise outside. On the 3rd night, I was so tired I had almost really fallen asleep. That's when I heard it, that little sound of the window being tampered with. It was almost 2 in the morning. It was raining outside, a light, continuous rain. George squeezed my hand under the blanket. The signal. I pretended I was still sleeping, but my heart was beating so hard I thought it would jump out of my mouth. The window opened. I heard the familiar creak, and then I heard his voice, that voice that haunted my nightmares. "Laura, Daddy's little girl. Daddy came back to get you. This time you're coming with me. Daddy prepared everything. The little room is ready, the crib is ready. Let's go home." He started to come in. I heard the sound of his boot touching the floor inside the room. I breathed slowly, pretending to sleep, tears silently running down my face. And then it happened. He took another step and, crack, his foot stuck in that glue George had spread. He tried to lift his foot, not understanding. In that moment of confusion, he took another step forward and, zoom! The fishing line caught his shin. My father tripped, lost his balance, and at the exact moment he fell forward, the mechanism activated and, flash! That powerful spotlight turned on right in his face, a light so bright that even I, with my eyes closed, saw the glare. "Ah, my eyes!" my father yelled, bringing his hands to his face, temporarily blinded by the intense light in the darkness. That's when George jumped out of bed. He pulled the rope from the headboard with force. I heard the sound, and in a second, that cargo net dropped from the closet right on top of my father, who was half fallen on the floor, half standing, trying to balance and see at the same time. The net fell perfectly, covering him completely, tangling in his arms, his legs. My father started to struggle, yelling, "Let go! Let me go! I just want my daughter! She's mine!" George turned on the bedroom light. He jumped over the bed and went for my father, and that's when he saw it, fallen on the floor next to my father, the rope. That thick rope, the same one he had brought the first time. With a bitter smile, George picked up the rope. "You brought the right tool, sir," he said, with that calm, cold voice. "Now I'm going to use it the way it should be used." And he used it. With the help of the net that was already holding my father, George wrapped that rope around him, tied his arms, tied his legs, made tight knots, sailor's knots, that he had learned when he was a boy. My father was kicking, screaming, crying, "Laura, my little girl, Daddy just wants to take care of you. Don't let him hurt me." I had gotten up from the bed, was standing there, shaking, watching that scene. My father, tied up with the very rope he had brought to tie me up. George ran to Mrs. Clementine's house, knocked on the door, asked her to call the police. He came running back. He stayed there, holding my father on the floor, while I curled up in a corner of the room, crying. When the police arrived, about 15 minutes later, they found that scene. My father, tied up like a package, crying and screaming, "She's my little girl, mine. I just want to take care of her, give her a bottle, change her diaper, she needs me." The sheriff arrived too. This time another policeman came, a younger one, who looked at the situation with disgust. This young policeman went to the gate where my father's car was parked and decided to look inside. My dears, what they found in that car gives me chills to this day. In the back seat, a package of adult diapers, baby bottles, pacifiers, a baby blanket, and worse, bottles of medicine, sedatives, strong sleeping pills. The policeman came back with all that in his hands, showed it to the sheriff and said he was going to drug her. He was going to leave her doped up, take her away, and keep her like that. Look at the amount of medicine here. It was at that moment that even the sheriff, my father's friend, turned white. Because this was no longer a family matter. This was kidnapping, imprisonment. This was a serious crime. My father was taken away that night. Tied up in his own rope, crying like a child, screaming, "I just want my baby! Give me back my baby! She needs her bottle!" In the following days, there was an inquiry. The town doctor, Dr. Anderson, examined my father and gave the diagnosis: severe psychosis, delusion, pathological obsession. He had truly gone mad with my mother's death, and that madness had fixated on me. My father was committed to a psychiatric institution in Charlotte. He spent years there. I never saw him again. Never wanted to. George told me it was better that way, that I needed to move on with my life, and he was right. That night, after the police took my father away, after Mrs. Clementine made chamomile tea for me and went home, after George cleaned up the mess in the bedroom, put everything back in order, we lay in bed, hugging. "It's over, Laura," he whispered in my ear. "It's really over. You're free." So, and for the first time in 20 years, my dears, I took a deep breath and felt that it was true. I was free. Finally. Completely free. Epilogue. Life after freedom. And here I am, my dears, at 78 years old, sitting on the porch of my little house here in Asheville, the same Asheville where I was born, where I suffered, but also where I found my George and where I built my real life. After that night when my father was taken away, George and I stayed in the little house in Mountain View for 2 more years. In 1969, we managed to buy our own home, this one where I live to this day, in a more central neighborhood near the church. It's a simple house, brick, painted light yellow, with a front garden that I care for lovingly, and a little backyard where George planted a grapevine that still produces grapes to this day. We had 3 children, my dears. 3 blessings. Marcus was born in 1968, Sylvia in 1971, and the youngest, Julia, the one who taught me to record these videos, was born in 1975. I raised my children with all the love I didn't have when I was young. I let them be real children, play, get dirty, grow up free. I never treated them the way I was treated. George helped me with that, always reminded me, Laura, let them live. George, my dear George, passed away 5 years ago in 2020. It was his heart. He went in his sleep without suffering. I thank God for that, for him not suffering. We were married for 53 years, my dears. 53 years beside the man who saved me, who protected me, who taught me what true love was. I miss him every day. I miss the way he drank his coffee, making that slurping sound. I miss him complaining that I put too much sugar in the coffee. I miss sleeping hugging him. But I'm not sad, because I know he lived well, that we were happy, that we built a beautiful family. And I know he's up there, watching over me, over our children, over our grandchildren. Today my life is simple and peaceful, just the way I always dreamed. I wake up early, make my coffee, sit here on the porch, and watch the day dawn. I take care of my plants. I have geraniums, violets, a jasmine plant that perfumes everything when it blooms, and the herbs I use to season food: basil, parsley, chives. George used to say my garden was the most beautiful on the street, and I keep taking care of it as if he were still here to see it. My children live here in Asheville, thank God. Marcus works at a hardware store. He's married to Patricia and gave me 3 grandchildren: Gabriel, Isabella, and Peter. Sylvia is a teacher at a public school. She married Ronald and has 2 beautiful girls, Sophia and Helena. And my Julia, the youngest, works at an accounting office. She's married to Fernando and has 2 boys, Lucas and Matthew. My 7 grandchildren are my joy, my dears. They come to my house almost every day, some for lunch, others just to visit Grandma and eat a piece of cake. I make coffee cake, I make homemade bread, I make cornbread, those delicious things that children love. The kitchen gets full of noise, laughter, mess, and I love every second of it. On Sunday afternoons, the house is packed. All 3 children come with their husbands and wives. All 7 grandchildren come, and we make a big lunch. I make pot roast like my mother used to make. I make salad, I make dessert. Everyone sits at that big kitchen table, which George made. He learned carpentry from my father way back, before everything happened. And we eat, talk, laugh. The grandchildren ask me to tell stories from my time, and I tell them, leaving out the bad parts. I tell them about old games, what Asheville was like when I was a child, the mischief I used to do with Bernice. At night, when I'm alone, sometimes I think about the past. I think about my mother, Maddie, who left so early and who I'm sure would be proud of the woman I became. I think about my father, too. He died in 1985, in the psychiatric institution where he was committed. They notified me, asked if I wanted to go to the funeral. I didn't go. I couldn't. I still had too much hurt, too much pain. Today, at the age I am, I can understand that he got sick, that madness took over him after my mother died. I can't forgive everything he did, but I can understand it was the illness. It wasn't him anymore. My life is full of small joys, my dears. The joy of waking up in the morning and hearing the birds singing. The joy of making bread and smelling the scent spreading through the house. The joy of receiving visits from the grandchildren. The joy of sitting here on the porch in the late afternoon, with my shawl around my shoulders and watching the street activity. The joy of knowing I'm free, that I built my family, that I won. I look back and see how far I've come. I left a prison, a life that wasn't a life, and built this. A house full of love, wonderful children and grandchildren, beautiful memories. It's been 58 years of freedom, 58 years really living, being Laura, being a woman, being a mother, being a grandmother. And you know what's most beautiful, my dears? It's that my children grew up free. They grew up knowing they were loved, that they could be whoever they wanted to be. And now my grandchildren are also growing up that way. The chain was broken. The cycle was interrupted. And that fills me with gratitude. Sometimes Julia asks me if I'm afraid those bad memories will come back to haunt me. I say no, because that was only one part of my life. It was a dark period, but it wasn't everything. The rest, everything that came after, was light. It was love. It was real life. And I thank God every day for giving me the strength to survive, for putting George in my path, and for allowing me to live everything I live today. Final message. My dears, I've reached the end of my story. And I know it was hard to hear, but it was important to tell. Because if there's someone out there going through something similar, whether it's control, obsession, or any kind of imprisonment that won't let you live, I want you to know something. You're not alone. And there is a way out. I learned many things in these 78 years of life, and I want to leave some of them here for you. I learned that true love doesn't imprison, it liberates. Love that locks doors, that forbids, that controls, that infantilizes. That's not love, that's sickness, it's imprisonment. No one who truly loves you wants to keep you from growing, from living, from being who you are. I learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's courage. I spent years thinking there was no way out, that no one would believe me. But when George appeared and I finally had the courage to tell, things started to change. Don't be ashamed to speak up, to shout, to ask for help. There are good people in the world. There are people who will listen to you and help you. I learned that we can indeed start over, no matter how many years we've lost. I was 20 years old when I managed to escape that prison. 20 years of stolen life. But I still had 58 years of freedom ahead. 58 years of happiness, family, true love. It's never too late to start again. I learned that the past doesn't need to define the future. I could have let that trauma destroy me, could have become a bitter person, full of fear. But I chose to live. I chose to be a mother, be a grandmother, be happy, and you can choose that too. I learned that breaking chains is the greatest legacy we can leave. My children grew up free because I was freed. My grandchildren are growing up in love because I chose love. When you save yourself, you also save the generations that come after. And I learned, my dears, that intelligence beats brute force. George didn't defeat my father with violence. He used his head, planned, and used my father's own weapon against him. Sometimes we don't need physical strength to defend ourselves. We need intelligence, patience, strategy. If you or someone you know is going through a situation of control, psychological abuse, imprisonment within their own home, seek help. In every country, in every city, there are people and organizations ready to help. Seek the authorities, seek support groups, seek the church if you're religious, seek a teacher, a trusted neighbor. Don't give up. Freedom exists and you deserve it. I want to thank all of you who stayed here with me until the end of this story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, but if it helped even one person, every word was worth it. Now I'd like to ask you something. If you liked the video, click that like button to help me out. Subscribe to Grandparents' Tales and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos, because I still have many stories to tell, some sad, some happy, but all true. And tell me in the comments, what time of day are you watching this video? Morning, afternoon, or evening? And what city are you from? I read all the comments, and I love knowing that there are people from all over the country and even from abroad listening to me. A kiss to the heart of each one of you. And remember, life is meant to be lived in freedom. Never give up on that.